Hi, this is Larry Levin, and welcome to another edition of Kop Talk. With me, as always, is the esteemed Robert Cohn, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the St. Louis Jewish Light.
Glad to be here, as always.
Okay, bin Laden, so much written. We've devoted so much space to it this week, so let me focus on a slightly different perspective than what a lot of people have talked about. According to published reports, the U.S. did not engage the Pakistani government, as we know, before going in with the Special Forces mission for fear that bin Laden sympathizers in the regime would sabotage the effort. What do you make of the ongoing clash between the Pakistani moderates within the government and those in the government and in the general population that are far more radical and would foment change in the name of Islamism? And has that latter group been disempowered at all by the death of bin Laden?
I think it was a setback for the radicals, clearly, and hopefully the moderates will eventually prevail in Pakistan. It's hard to be very optimistic about that. I mean, this fellow lived in a huge home within a stone's throw of the Pakistani equivalent of West Point, and so it defies credulity that
they didn't know. Yeah. It is stunning, and of course Pakistan receives a tremendous amount of aid from the United States.
Millions.
So it was very hard for them to argue too loudly about what transpired.
Exactly.
So Hamas once again demonstrated their true colors this week by condemning the slaying and reiterating their belief in bin Laden as a great leader. Yet Hamas is in real flux right now on a number of fronts. First, they and the Palestinian Authority have just reached agreement on governing principles for Palestinian territories. Then they refused to take sides in Syria between the government and the revolutionary forces. So my question is, and they're looking outside Syria possibly for a new home. So my question is, how, if at all, will this affect the peace process with Israel?
Well, you know, it may be a surprisingly positive development in the long run, as far-fetched as that sounds, because everyone's in agreement there should be a state of Palestine at some point or another. The Palestinians are trying to do an end run around the peace process and get it done at the United Nations.
As a unilateral
thing. I say let it happen. You know, it won't affect the situation on the ground. Now, it's not a positive development that Hamas officially called Osama bin Laden a holy warrior and needs to be mourned. Relations between the Palestinians and Syria have never really been very positive, going back to the days of Arafat.
Right.
And it'll be interesting to see how all of this stuff sorts out. And I am concerned about the increased influence of the Muslim Brotherhood already in the interim government of Egypt. And they have reopened the tunnels between the borders of Gaza. So those are worrisome developments.
President Obama made a decision to go after and ultimately kill bin Laden on foreign soil without permission of a sovereign nation. This is, shall we say, a fairly bold move in the world of international relations. There's no question that Americans overwhelmingly approved of the move. How will it sit with the world community?
Good question. I think that the Western world, the European Union, countries like France, Great Britain, Italy, etc., are relieved. They will applaud it. There'll be a more muted response, or has been a more muted response in some of the more traditionally neutral countries and some of the third world countries. I think that everyone feels a sense of tremendous relief.
But let me follow up on that, because certainly if France said, if France made a decision to go after a known French criminal on United States soil and did it without our knowledge or consent, we would be, shall we say, pissed. So is this simply a case of situational determination or situational ethics, where it's okay because of the severity of the crimes committed?
Both, because Obama said in one of his debates with Hillary Clinton that if he had actionable intelligence that Osama bin Laden or a comparable target was in Pakistan, and when Pakistan was not going to give permission, that would not deter him from taking out Osama bin Laden. It's a direct
And you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
So let me follow up on that. Would you have taken bin Laden alive had he surrendered? I mean, the U.S. would then either be subject to the conventions relating to war prisoners or would be tried in a civil court. Is either acceptable? If we had captured Hitler, would anyone have been satisfied with less than a killing?
I don't think so, and that's why we allowed the Russians to go in there to make sure he was good and dead.
And I would not be okay with letting him live after his surrender, and I'll tell you why. Because, well, one reason why, and that is because he doesn't have the ability to speak on behalf of any sovereign. there are headless attributes of Al Qaeda
Exactly.
that are out there all over the world. He could surrender all he wants, and they would still be plotting to perform terrorist acts on U.S. soil and otherwise. So to me, a surrender is meaningless. Finally, what do you make of the vast online debate about whether or not we should ever rejoice in the death of an enemy? This conversation, of course, has biblical roots.
Yes.
And it's a very important one to have, no matter what your position is on the issue. So why don't you talk about that?
There's a midrash that when the angels saw the Egyptians drown, that God rebuked them for saying, well, how could you celebrate when my creatures, my creations, the Egyptians are drowning? And it is a Jewish... Now, on the other hand, when Haman died, there was celebration. And I think as long as we don't make the death of the enemy the main focus, what is being celebrated is a great victory over the forces of utter evil.
The death of hate and injustice.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. And I actually was pleased with... When was the last time we saw college kids draping themselves in the American flag, mm-hmm. shouting USA, USA for essentially a military thing, not since World War II has that been seen.
It's a very, very potent visual message.
Yes.
So that's all we have time for today. Thanks for visiting us, and we'll be back next time on Kop Talk. Take care.